You come here, okay, with maybe your opinion, and you tell me who Samuel was and what we were going through. But what you say is just, it is just a little part of the whole situation.
This boy's been hit so many times in his life that violence is practically it's a normal state of affairs with him. I can't see 2 slaps in the face provoking him into committing murder.
It may have been too many. Everyone has a breaking point.
I did not kill him.
That's not the point.
My name is George.
My name is Devyn.
And this is Medicinema, your healthy dose of film.
Today we'll be discussing 2 courtroom dramas. But first, George, I heard you recently had a trip to the cinema.
Yeah, just a day ago I went to the cinema. I've seen 2 movies. A rescreening of the classical anime Akira on the big screen with surround sound, which was amazing. I've never seen it in cinemas before. And the soundtrack really was kind of incredible hearing it on such a big surround sound setup.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it was lovely. That totally found new appreciation for that movie as well now. Yeah, the second thing I saw was a little bit more out there. It was actually the first 3D movie I've seen in ages, but it's an art house documentary by Wim Wenders, the German director who made a documentary on Anselm Kiefer, German artist, sculpturing and painter, and there's a lot of big-scale art installations where he fills complete halls with just his artwork, and a lot of the experience of checking out his art, I feel like, is walking through it. So the whole concept of filming it in 3D was really powerful because it kind of immersed you within that world that this artist created. It was also a very interesting movie.
That's really, really cool. I've not seen a 3D movie, I think, since I think the first Avatar.
Oh, wow.
How long it's been since I've seen a 3D movie. So like my conception of like 3D movies in the theater are still like headache inducing. I've heard it's much better nowadays. Did you get headaches at all?
No, I think that's also a very much a personal thing. Like a lot of people just never had that problem. I don't think I had that problem even with the first screenings back then.
I've done 3D movies in VR before, but that's like not the same thing as like the big screen, the theater, you know.
Yeah.
That Akira screening is really, really awesome. I didn't expect that. When you told me earlier that you'd seen a movie, I was like, why didn't you tell me what movie it was? And now I kind of see why you left that up as a surprise. That's pretty awesome. Man, did you see that as a younger person originally, or did you see that as an adult the first time?
I saw it as an adult the first time, definitely. It is one of those where, when my whole movie binge really began and I wanted to get into more different kinds of movies, it is one of the first you'll find when researching anime and the whole cosmos of that filmography. So yeah, definitely an adult experience, but it's been a while since I've seen it, and it was lovely to return to it on a big screen.
And as an animation fan, I know you probably see the ripples that Akira has caused through animation and the amount of influence it's really had.
Not even just animation, like you can look at this film and you see without Akira there probably wouldn't be a Ghost in the Shell. Without a Ghost in the Shell there wouldn't be The Matrix even. Without The Matrix there wouldn't be Everything Everywhere All at Once, you know. You can trace it all back to that kind of, very influential movie for sure.
An amazing legacy. Well, that's a lot more exciting of a week that I had. Here in the States, it was Thanksgiving this week, and I was hit with a pretty hard cold, maybe even flu, I'm not really sure. But I was feeling pretty much like crap all week, and then top that on with food and traveling and family. And I didn't really get to see many things last week.
Damn.
It's a whole experience over here, Thanksgiving. It's a lot of cooking and a lot of stress and a lot of football on TV, which I'm not so much a fan of. But I did catch the second the Spider-Verse movie. I did catch that finally. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh man, fantastic! Wow, that's a great film. I'm not gonna spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, but that's wow, that was really good.
I think in a kind of retrospective, it's a bit weird to talk about the retrospective when it's like a few months old, but ever since this movie released, all of those news released about the working conditions of the animators and how the story changed throughout the animation process a few times. And it's kind of incredible to me that this movie fits together as well as it does, knowing all the troubles that happened behind the scenes. And, you know, if you just read up on this movie's creation, you'd assume it's a scrambled mess and nothing fits. But you can't feel it when you're watching the movie. The movie itself feels like the most coherent, thought out project from the beginning. And that's kind
Oh
of
yeah,
incredible.
I didn't even know any of that about it.
Oh yeah, like 100 animators left the team or something like that. It was pretty horrible apparently.
And we're getting to that point, where films start to look so amazing, or even video games start to look really amazing, and it's almost inevitable that those people were under a crunch, that they don't create something that amazing anymore without just terrible work conditions. It feels like sometimes it feels like that's becoming indicative of these, trying to outdo each other visually type escapades that we're going through.
Yeah, let's hope they'll make a union. I don't think there's an animation union yet in Hollywood, like there's for the actors or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if there is at all. Oh my gosh, I never thought about that.
I think the VFX artists at Marvel are unionizing right now, so that's kind of cool. Maybe the animators can do so too.
Yeah, that'd be really nice. I bet it would change the cartoon industry quite a lot as well to do that. It'd be really nice. There's a lot of problems there too. With that, you want to move into our premiering movies of the week?
For sure. The first movie we're gonna talk about is the classic 1957 film 12 Angry Men. This is gonna be a spoiler discussion, so if you haven't seen this, you have been warned. 12 Angry Men follows the deliberation of 12 jurors in a murder trial with the outlook of potentially sentencing the defending teenage boy to death. The case seems pretty clear to 11 of those jurors, voting for guilty immediately. Only juror number 8 is not convinced yet, and what follows is the dissecting and questioning of each and every proof brought to the table. How did you enjoy this one, Devyn?
Oh man, I really, really like this movie. I saw it for the first time about a week or so ago, and then did my rewatch today. I think that there is like a Twilight Zone episode or an Outer Limits episode, or maybe even a Hitchcock Presents, where they condense this down to like a 30-minute story. I'm fairly certain I saw that before this, because as I was watching it, it was one of those experiences where it was like, I already know what's happened. I know what's about to happen. Every time something happened, like, well, yeah, that's what happens in the story, right? But I didn't remember any of it visually. But yeah, I really loved it. I love courtroom dramas. I really love classic movies. James Fonda is amazing. It just has a lot of things that really work for me. I think the thing that I want to bring up first and foremost with this movie that really blows me away is the blocking. For people who don't know, blocking is essentially when you have the camera move around a set and people move around the set, and you decide what's going to be in the frame that entire time and where people will be standing. And this movie is incredibly alive. There are just dudes walking around, constantly changing paces, going to the bathroom, getting water, and literally no scene is wasted. Every single scene has such intentionality behind who's sitting where, what their face is doing behind that person, why we're looking at these two people, even though this was the one person talking. It's a masterwork in movement. It's a ballet in film. And I really, really, really love that about this movie.
Yeah, that's absolutely lovely. Briefly on the whole, you might have seen this before without seeing this before. I think that's an experience quite a lot of people had. This isn't even the first version of itself. This is an adaptation of a TV live show, or like a live play. In the 50s, this was a common thing where on a weekly basis, the TV stations had kind of this, almost Black Mirror-esque, we're doing a 1 hour long news story that is not in relation to last week, and next week we're gonna do the next one. And this was one of those live TV plays. They were always shot live with several cameras and cut live by the director, basically. Switched just between the cameras. This was one of those plays. It was written by Reginald Rose. He wrote it after being himself a juror at a trial. And due to the experience of having that deliberation take place, he realized that that's kind of a part of the American trial system that hasn't been portrayed really yet. So he really wanted to focus on that one. This 1957 version that we watched is the direct adaptation of that. Mr. Fonda was actually such a big fan of the TV version that he really wanted to make it happen and used all of his power in Hollywood, basically. This was also his first executive producer credit, despite never being present for the actual screening of the "here's what we did today," the part you do as a producer, signing off on the footage you got. He hated that because he doesn't like watching himself as an actor, which a lot of actors do.
That's really funny.
Yeah, he apparently showed up to the first meeting and then no longer to any other of the meetings.
That's really funny.
Yeah, but after this film, this movie had a long history with getting adapted again and again, both on the stage. There were several stage play versions of this, particularly in the 60s, but also in film. There's a pretty well-known one that released in 1997 by William Friedkin, the guy who also did The Exorcist. And there's even like a Russian version that released in 2007. So there's quite a lot of versions of this story. And this, even if you haven't seen it, there's a good chance you have seen the story before, as you put it.
I'd love to see that Russian version, to be honest. I gotta imagine they got to adjust it for Russian court systems and stuff, or jurors, or they gotta have a little bit different rules, right?
Yeah, probably. You would just assume so.
What'd you think about it, man?
Yeah, I love it. I'll get into it a little later. I first wanted to talk about Sidney Lumet's background a bit, because I think this is actually quite a lot of his upbringing, and his life can be felt in the qualities of 12 Angry Men. Lumet's father worked at the theater, both as a director and playing parts in his own plays. And since that was pretty good money during the Great Depression, he kind of got the whole family into the business and got them to play parts. And that way, even the little boy, Sidney Lumet, got on stage and started acting. When he was 11, he already ended up at Broadway. And he said in interviews that the fearlessness of those actors and the general work ethic at Broadway was a huge influence on him as a person and the way he works. Due to political beliefs, he wanted to enlist for the Second World War, but he was only 17 at the time, so the army just couldn't take him. And they offered him instead a program that was super brand new for this revolutionary tech called radar.
That's hilarious.
So he enlisted basically in a training program to learn about radar technology. And he said in interviews after that 6 months of that training taught him more about the job of an electrician than he could have ever learned in a 3-year apprenticeship of an electrician, which gave him a lot of technical understanding for later on down the road. After the war, he returned to acting shortly, but since the theater group he was with at the time had creative disputes, it kind of split up. He was the one who really spoke up for the actors, and when he got thrown out, 13 other actors left with him. So he then got a few more of his actor friends together, and they started their own theater company. which was really the beginning of his directing career. Since they were all just actors, someone had to step up and do the directing just out of necessity. When the TV revolution really took place, a friend of his got a job at CBS and wanted to get Lumet involved because, to quote, none of these people here knows what they are doing. So Lumet got into live TV directing. He didn't direct the TV version of 12 Angry Men, but he directed 4 other screenplays by Reginald Rose. So that was that connection. And when it came to actually adapting 12 Angry Men for the big screen, the budget was very tight. And since Sidney Lumet didn't direct anything for the cinema before, he was fairly cheap to get. And since they already had a relationship, the writer and him, he came up pretty quickly. And I think a lot of that, all of that background can really be felt in this. The fact that he was trained in the theater and had to always be fast with his decisions with live plays and some stuff like that really played into his ability to prepare this. As you pointed out, the blocking in this movie is kind of incredible. And that was just due to the fact that Sidney Lumet always did a lot of preparation. They rehearsed the whole thing for way longer than the shooting of the movie took place. When it came to shooting, each and everyone on set basically knew what was expected of them, when they had to be at which point of where they had to stand, what line to deliver in what way. And he's known for basically getting everything in 1 or 2 takes. He's the polar opposite of someone like Stanley Kubrick or something like that in that regards.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those dudes in that era, were coming out of the age of radio, and radio dramas and radio shows were really big in the United States. And a lot of people don't know, but they were always done live as well with all their sound effects and stuff. So, when TV kind of came around, that was like the immediate, well, that we just do it the same way you would do radio, but with a camera. Man, how far we've come. I wonder if he would look back and, look at us and their filming ways and be like, it's so lazy. You can get it all done in one go.
Yeah, I actually think so in a way. He was apparently known for being kind of angry about inefficiency on set. Like that was, he was very much a man of work ethics, which, apparently points back to his experiences at Broadway at a very young age.
And this movie's very efficient. It is.
Yeah.
It's a short, like an hour and 37 minutes or something like that. It really cuts through all of its points very quickly and in a very succinct, good pacing, in my opinion. So when I first watched this movie, I actually missed the moment that they show the accused's face. Right? They show his face and then they like go into the, deliberation room, the juror room. Yeah. I must have like been looking at my wife or something, or you know what I mean? But I literally, it's just a short little moment they do that, and I missed it. And I think she did too, because we're watching it and we're talking about how they bring up like, oh, this kid from the slums, or that kind of kid, they do this, and they like really, a couple of the jurors, especially juror 10, really reduces him down to like his race, Yeah. And when you don't know the kid's race, I think it does 2 things. I think it tells you a lot about yourself and about what race you might think he is. And I think it actually makes the movie a lot more lasting, because if this movie was remade today, he wouldn't have been the race depicted in the film. They would obviously use a race that had more impact of this time, because that is not a race that is so as marginalized as it was at that time. So I think the lack of having it almost made it a little better to me.
Interesting. Because that is actually a change they did for the cinematic version. In the TV version, they never showed the defendant.
Oh, it's a better idea.
Yeah, but the thing is, I'm not sure if any of the racial angle was in the TV version. Like the lines within the deliberation where they mention the race, they might already be part of that change,
Mm-hmm.
That might
That
all
makes
not
sense.
have been part of it. I'm not too sure.
That's fair. The other thing I kind of noted watching this that I found really interesting in the writing was whenever one of the jurors is talking about the accused in a negative fashion, in the fashion that they're guilty, they almost always refer to them as a guy or man. They say, that man killed his father, that guy killed his father. The ones who don't think he's guilty call him boy and kid. Really emphasizing that youth and innocence of him as they're trying to declare his innocence, or at least his, unsure of being guilty. But as the movie progresses, I notice that as each character who's going to start to break and switch their vote start referring to him as kid or boy instead of guy. And you can kind of almost start to predict who's going to be the next to flip their vote.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually didn't pick up on that one. I have a similar note on the visual side of things and the visual progression of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
The movie starts off generally with wide shots. Most of the camera is above eye level. It feels like everyone has a space, both in the room to walk around, but also within the framing. We often see all of the characters at once. And as the film goes on and tension rises, the camera is often closer to the characters. It's barely shots of the whole crew anymore. It's often one or two people in screen at a time. It is blocked in a way where even the room feels more claustrophobic. They use longer lenses to compress the background. The bodies in frame overlap and almost seem to press against each other. It is a very controlled way to really heighten the tension on a visual side. And the editing also plays into this. People paid attention and apparently did the math. Around 50% of all the cuts in this movie happen within the last 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a clear difference within the first time they vote. You see this wide shot and you see everyone's hands going up, and it's basically within one shot. There's no cut in it. And by the end, there's that one vote where you see all of the close-up hands just rising, and you cut to each and every person. So by giving characters each their own close-up shots of particularly the hand, it kind of implies that the opinions are so divisive at this point that they can't even share the screen with each other anymore. They all have to have the screen to themselves at that point, which I think is a really interesting way to approach all of that tension in a very subtle way. An interesting part to the whole Sidney Lumet legacy is that he doesn't really get mentioned all that often when talking about the great directors of that time, despite the fact that several of his movies are generally considered some of the greatest movies of all time. He, as a person, as an artist, is rarely included in those discussions. And I think a lot of it is due to the fact that something I already pointed out, he was a man who is known for efficiency, and often that efficiency kind of, I guess, takes away from the idea that he's a great artist as well. A Kubrick with 130 takes, it's easier to point at and be like, yeah, he was really a perfectionist. He really knew what he wanted, but people ignore the fact that Lumet rehearsed for ages and also knew what he wanted and had this background in acting and knew how to get the performances out of the actors in a very efficient manner. But that, I don't think that ever takes away from, his creative drive, his clear vision that he had.
Not at all. There's tons of art forms, where the preparation
is 90% of the actual art, getting those things ready, stencil making, all those kinds of things, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the second part really is probably that creative decisions he does make on a, like, let's say those closer shots towards the end and the higher editing pace. They are so subtle that it doesn't really stick out to you, you know? When Wes Anderson designs a shot, it's very much grabbing your attention. It sticks out. It tries to show you, hey,
Very in your face.
yeah, it's in your face. It wears the creative decision on its sleeve, if you want to put it that.
That's a good way to put it.
Here, it's really all the creative decisions are in an effort to emphasize the story aspects of it all. And yeah, I totally think he is a master of his craft, or was a master of his craft.
That's really, really well put. I don't think I really know many other things he's done.
I've seen 3 of his other films, yeah, so far, but all of them were fantastic. The Network was one I saw, Dog Day Afternoon, and The Hill. 50s, 60s, and 70s movies in their own regards, but yeah, all of them fantastic.
This was his debut film.
Yes, yeah, he did a lot of TV work before that, but this was his debut for the big screen. One thing I want to get into about the efficiency, which kind of relates to the lens choice thing. The way they filmed this was really to split up all of the shots that happen in the story into 8 different groups, divided by the wall they were facing. So they literally had shots labeled after wall 1, wall 2, wall 3, wall 4, depending on which wall the camera was looking at. And, you know, about 2/3 through the movie, the lighting conditions change since there's a thunderstorm breaking out in front of the windows.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to have 4 additional blocks of wall 1, wall 2, wall 3, wall 4 with just changed lighting conditions. So they basically set up the camera and all of the equipment exactly 8 times, got all the shots from this very perspective with this lighting condition, and then moved on to the next, which is insane to think about if you consider the fact that throughout the film and throughout the actual order of the shots taking place, the camera changes so much and the lenses change and everything has to be this progressive, continuational, getting tighter. But it was absolutely filmed out of order, and that was just happening in Sidney Lumet's mind.
So I think, it doesn't detract from how impressive this film does that with, like you said, with lighting and lenses and stuff, right?
Mhm.
But I think that also stems from early films, the weight and the size of the cameras and how difficult they were to move around and to reset and to reposition. And this is before tracks, dollies, all these kinds of things that made that easier to reset in the correct positions, right? So I kind of think I think that's how a lot of things were filmed, weren't they, for a long time, where like they would film everything they needed at this one angle?
I mean, I guess that was the perfect way people imagined it, but the reality was often different. Like, as I already pointed out, the budget wasn't big for this movie. And still, when Sidney Lumet gave them the finished product, he was 15% under budget. He was just that efficient with getting everything he needed. And yeah, I don't think they did a single pickup shot afterwards. He got every single shot he needed for the edit within those 8 shooting blocks, and that's it.
Wow.
I can briefly mention something that I always love is this idea of setting up a rule, but knowing when to break it. So, as I pointed out, this way it was filmed, it gets progressively tighter, but there are 2 exceptions where Sidney Lumet on purpose broke that rule. The first one being when juror number 3 almost like stabs juror number 8, you know, where he tries to show that you can stab a man like that with that knife.
Mhm.
Right after that, there's this confrontation where he even says, "I'm gonna kill you." And juror number 3 points out, "Yeah, you don't really mean that, do you?" No, mirroring the whole murder trial, obviously, but the result after that is that basically all of the other 11 jurors end up on one side of the room and stand united in a wide shot again against juror number 3 to show solidarity that, yeah, that was just over the line. You can't do that, really. So that is one of the times it breaks out. And the second time, which I think is even more powerful, is when, is it juror number 10 that does the really racial remarks?
It is 10, yeah. He's
Yeah.
the super racist one, yeah.
Yeah, when juror number 10 goes on his hardcore racist spree, that is really the one time we absolutely go into the white. The camera zooms back. We see the whole table and we see everyone progressively get up, leave their chair, and let him stand there alone and kind of form this circle. And that's again the latest instance where we see all of them at the same time. None of them block each other within the screen. They all stand united despite not standing next to each other. Yeah, it's beautiful to see not only that concept in motion, but also the freedom and the deliberate attempts to break the concept in itself.
Very well put. I wish I had more on to add that. I do not. I'm really happy that you suggested this movie, that we talk about this film, because, like I said, I had just recently watched it, and I didn't get to talk to anybody about it because of the nature of that I watched it in. So I'm really enjoying being able to discuss this movie finally. I think one last thing I want to add is I think it speaks a lot of volumes about the American justice system and the lawyers, and especially court-appointed lawyers. And what that means in the U.S. is that, you know, you hear the phrase, you know, if you don't have a lawyer, one will be appointed to you. That means if you can't buy a lawyer, the court will just give you one. They still charge you for that, by the way. It's not free.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, they just charge you later. But it's a court-appointed lawyer, so they pick the lawyer, right? And the lawyers don't really make much money off of that. They don't get extra, really, like, you know, a bunch of compensation a lot of times if you win. So a lot of them, you know, didn't have the drive sometimes to really, like they say, work hard on these kind of cases, right? And I think it says a lot of volumes that juror 8, you know, the main juror in this, James Fonda, he's able to go to the pawn shop a couple blocks from the kid's house and find an identical knife. But that's not something that the kid's defense attorney was willing to do. That was too much work. That they bring up a couple times, you know, that why would you want to defend that kid? You saw him, you know, blah, 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 blah. Of course they didn't want to defend him. And that's honestly still a problem in America today that we really see and face is these court-appointed lawyers that just don't really care. And it's very cliquey. These appointed lawyers, you know, it's a weird situation. But it's I think it says a lot that they touch about this in 1957.
Yeah. Yeah, I have 2 more little things to add. The first is actually a note by my roommate, kind of. We watched this together. It was his first time watching it. He also thinks he's seen it before somewhere, you know, another adaptation, probably the 90s version. And one thing he pointed out was that the one person, I can't really say which juror it was, sadly, but one of them always fiddles around with something in his hands. He's obsessed with the broken van, and, you know, everything that the actor plays that part kind of points at ADHD, which is fascinating considering that it's a 1950s movie, and I don't think ADHD was even a term yet or something that was defined back then.
No.
So it's kind of interesting that just watching it, he kind of made this joking remark of like you could see him fiddle around again, and he was like, man, it's such a ADHD behavior of him again. Just like earlier when he did this and this, and then he mentioned a few times, and I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. That character definitely has ADHD, but without that thing existing.
The symptoms and person type were already there, just not the diagnosis.
For sure, but as an actor or the writer, whoever put that in, having the sensibility to portray it in a way where 70 years down the line you can still make out what it's supposed to be, kind of insane considering that the definition of it all hasn't existed yet, you know?
That makes me wonder a little bit, the scene in which they go to the bathroom and they take a little break in the bathroom. There's two things I wanted to bring up about that scene, I guess. The salesman guy, I don't remember which one he is now at the moment. He's sitting there smoking a cigarette in the bathroom, talking to James Fonda, trying to convince him to go against it, right? Then he leaves. Mm-hmm. James Fonda fiddles with drying his hands on the most terrible hand drying systems in the universe, which is the second thing I wanted to talk to you about in a second. And then the third guy comes in, talks to James for a minute. James walks over to the windowsill, picks up that first guy's cigarette, puts it out and throws it away. I noticed another moment in the movie, he gets a cup or something like that, and I don't remember if it's him or somebody else that throws it away. But I wonder if that's also a thing if people pick up after that one guy over and over again.
Mm.
But I would have to pay more attention. I just noticed the one with the James Fonda picking that up.
Mm-hmm.
But those, I do want to bring back real quick just as a point of interest, or, and something that I think is fun to highlight that makes our podcast unique is the American versus European retrospectives on a lot of different things. And did you ever have those kind of hand dryers?
Oh yeah. Those exist. I think they still exist in some places. It's been a while since I've seen one of those, but they definitely exist.
They're terrible, aren't they?
Yeah, they are awful.
He like sticks his whole face into it, and I literally almost gagged. I was like, oh, like
there's gotta be so much bacteria on that, yeah.
He picks his fingernails out into it and shit, and I'm like, damn, dude.
Yeah. The next person to wipe the face is gonna have all those fingernail dirt in his face.
Oh God, I have not seen one of those in a long time here. In fact, a lot of bathrooms here don't even have paper anymore. It's all like air drying and like Dyson air blades and weird stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's mostly it nowadays here as well.
That's good. That's good. Kind of just on that same idea that we can have this unique views on stuff. I think this will reflect a lot on the next movie when we get there.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, how different is this court juror setup than what exists in Austria? Because I know nothing about Austrian law.
Yeah, throughout the recording of this episode, I almost expected this question to come up at a certain point, and I really wish I would have researched the Austrian justice system, because I have no idea if we have jurors. I have no idea if like any of that really looks the same. I think the big difference already is that trials aren't really like a thing that you can watch on TV or something like that. There's kind of famous trials, I guess, against corrupt politicians, but you get news after that of, yeah, this is what happened today and this here and there. But I'm not sure if cameras are even like allowed often within the courtroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of more well-known Austrian court cases. The one thing that comes to mind are the results of that. What did he get into jail for that? Did he have to pay a fine or something? But I don't have any recollection of in courtroom drama or something like that in Austria. So maybe that's just not that much of a thing.
That makes perfect sense. I think most court systems have jurors, I think, but I don't really know now that you say it. I've never imagined that world. I will say, in the USA, every person is required to be a juror. Everyone. It's not like you might randomly get picked. It's no, if you're alive and you make it to like 40 years old, you will have been picked to go be a juror at some point. It's a requirement of our country.
Yeah, and that's kind of a reason why I don't think that's a thing here, because I think that's kind of inevitable to have it like randomized in a way and have at least everyone give a chance that he is a juror once. And I don't know a single person who would have ever been a juror at anything like this, so I don't think that's a thing.
Well, it's actually interesting. I shouldn't say that everybody's required to be a juror. What I should say is everybody is required to attend jury duty. And what I mean by that is that they take you basically into like a big room with like literally 40 to 50 other people. And they ask things like, does anybody know this person we're going to go on trial with? Does anybody work at the place they worked at? Or, they go through all these things that might be conflicts of interest and like file some of those people out. And then when they have, say, like 20 people, right, or 30 even, right, the court goes and deliberates, and the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney decide. It's almost like picking teams, like on a sports, or like picking players on a sports team. They pick their jurors that they think will best make their case win.
The interesting thing, I kind of already knew all of that. Like, I am way more versed in the American justice system just due to movies and stuff like that than I am in the Austrian.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's really funny.
Just watching stuff like the documentaries on the OJ trial and stuff like that. All of that is part of
Oh,
this.
yeah. Yeah. And when we get to our second movie, we're going to really talk about that because it's the very flip side for me.
Oh, yeah.
I'm completely in the dark when it comes to that juror system.
I guess just a final praising of my side of the story writing in this. When you break down the concept, there's a few core struggles that the screenplay really had to overcome, and I think it does all of them perfectly and flawlessly, which is why it still holds up today. For the initial setup to work, all of the evidence must be very clearly pointing towards the idea that the boy actually did the murder. You have to be mostly on par with the 11 jurors in the beginning. Otherwise, you wouldn't believe that the voting would be that clear, which I think the story does. At the same time, you gotta have all of the little setups for the little twists to come, which will change around the perspective on that sad evidence. But it has to be subtle enough so you don't pick up on it immediately and go like, oh, wait a minute, that woman couldn't have seen blah, 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 whatever. Which I think it does subtly enough, and all of those little setups are definitely there. At the same time, the twists have to be significant enough for each and every character turnaround to be believable as well, which I think the movie does fantastically. And yeah, it's just kind of incredible to have that all play out, because the concept of, oh yeah, everyone but one is for being guilty, and then by the end, all of the 12, some would agree, even you might say juror number 3 was kind of pressured into it, I guess. I don't think he is fully convinced by the end, but they all kind of agree that he's not guilty by the end. And getting to that conclusion, dragging along the viewer and convincing him as well from the first instance of, oh yeah, he's definitely guilty, to no, he's definitely not guilty, is kind of a mammoth task. And I think it fully succeeds with each and every detail and every twist it takes along the road.
Couldn't have said it better, and you're absolutely right. I don't really have anything else to say about this movie other than just I really enjoyed it. I really want to see this Russian remake. I think it's a classic story, and I wouldn't mind seeing it remade in other ways too. Honestly, I think it's great. I think people should see it all the time, no matter what.
Yeah, fantastic story, and also fantastic work on the directing side, despite it often being overlooked. What Sidney Lumet added to the table here.
It's just fantastic.
Our second movie is Anatomie d'une chute, or Anatomy of a Fall, the multi-award winning French courtroom drama directed by Justine Triet.
The film stars Sandra Huller, Swan Arlud, and Milo Machado Granar. I'm probably butchering all of those names. The film's accolades include the Palme d'Or, the Cologne Film Prize, as well as the Palme Dog Award. In this film, a young boy finds his father dead outside his house one morning, and what follows is an intense trial with the boy's own mother as the prime suspect. What did you think of this movie, George?
I love this movie. I've seen it at a festival quite early in its screening days, and yeah, I was really blown away. This is really one of those that lingers in your mind, I feel like, and grows stronger. For like the 24 hours after watching this film, I barely had any other thoughts in my mind other than Anatomy of a Fall, and realizing more and more details that I appreciate about it. I've rewatched it for this now, and yeah, I definitely picked up on quite a few more things that just add to it all. It's one of those where everything fits, everything adds to the themes, the visual side of it, and the lines written and said by the characters. It all accumulates to one big pile of greatness in film.
Very nice.
How did you enjoy this?
I'm gonna break your heart here, man.
Yeah, I'm feeling it.
This was a good movie. I am not going to take that away at all. I enjoyed it. I liked this movie. I don't think this would even fit in my top 4 courtroom dramas. This movie felt very made for TV, honestly, to me sometimes. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, man. It was really good in a lot of ways, and there were certain parts of the movie that were obviously nowhere near made for TV stuff, like we'll get there, but the dog and there was a lot of things. But kind of a lot of just those in-between moments just were not super compelling to me, to be honest. I have a lot of thoughts. That, we'll get to as we cross each bridge of this movie, because there are a lot of interesting points about this movie.
Mhm.
I guess I want to start with the first thing that we really experience with this movie, which is the 2008 Bacau Rhythm and Steel Band cover of Pimp P-I-M-P by 50 Cent. This is one of the most bizarre music choices I have seen in a film in a long time.
It's amazing.
It is one of the things I really enjoy about this movie. It's one of the things that drives me insane about this movie. Man, was this a strong choice of a song to use in this film.
I want to add, even before that, something I noticed on this rewatch, the very first spoken line is, "What do you want to know?" Which is a perfect summarization, I feel like, of this movie. But yeah, after that, obviously the song is the thing that sticks out in the beginning. And I love how that is kind of our introduction to the husband. In the beginning, we don't see the husband, we don't hear the husband, we are aware of his presence, and he makes his anger really audible, not visible, but audible to us and to the guest, by the song choice and by the volume of it being blasted through the room. Having a kind of misogynistic song choice and having that on this super repetitive loop is kind of a perfect middle finger by the husband and a great first introduction to his character.
The wife character, Sandra Hüller, right? She's German, correct? So I think there's almost even an underhandedness in the fact that it's a German band. This band that's covering it. It's like there's something that's pointing at her.
That's great. I love that you picked up on that. I think it's actually not intentionally. As far as I know, they wanted to get the original, but they couldn't afford it. So they looked for cover versions of it.
That makes sense.
It makes sense that you would point at the fact, because there's definitely a quote later on in the movie that on a meta level kind of comments on the heritage or like the background of the various people working on this film. So it plays with those ideas for sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you love this movie a lot.
Yeah,
I'm gonna let you start on this. I want you to take it away a little bit, and I'll try to pop in here on some of
sure.
this.
Just initially, I already love the concept. The husband being the victim, the wife being the suspect, and the son being the sole bystander and sole witness, even not if not directly, is kind of an amazing power dynamic with all the things that come due to that. With the boy can't take care of himself, so the mother still has to be somewhat around. She can't be completely secluded from them. All of that serves just for a great setup. It's kind of amazing to me that it uses the courtroom drama really more as a vehicle to explore the relationship between those characters and less about the courtroom drama itself. And by the end, we'll get to it, but it's kind of vague. It doesn't really say if she did it or not. She gets...
So she's acquitted.
Yeah.
She's let go in the end. I watched the beginning of this, really trying to pay as much attention to every detail as I could. And the one detail that kept standing out to me in the moments of the fall itself is that song. And I think there's something important about that. I immediately was like, oh man, how terrible it is to watch your dad die to PIMP. Like that's such a fucking terrible experience. But in her entire defense, right?
Mm-hmm.
She had the interview, he's playing the music,
Mm-hmm.
she does some stuff, they talk, and it's given the idea that the music is turned off at this point.
No. When would it
Are you
be
sure?
turned off? Because in the recreation we have those elements of the music blasting, and they are trying to figure out if there was a way that the boy could have heard it despite the music still blasting. So they had the argument.
Heard the fight before he left.
Yeah.
Not after he got back.
Oh
Because
no!
that's the moment when he's gone. That's when the mom supposedly went upstairs and had a conversation with the dad, which implies that he turned the music off. Correct?
No, I don't think so. I took that as they were just still talking after he left, basically. And once he returns, the music is still blasting on loop the same way. She's talking to the police as PIMP is blasting.
There's no, I don't know. There's no way that with the music as loud as it was that they could have had a basic conversation together with the music playing that loud, right?
Mm.
So I felt like she was lying. It's one of those movies that warrants a rewatch for that kind of thing, because like you said, you don't really know, you're not really sure.
And that is kind of the thing I wanted to get at. We kind of ended up discussing right now of if she did it or not. But I think what the movie does great is it sets up this idea of it doesn't matter what the truth is within the trial. One of the first things her attorney says to her is, Sandra says to him, "Stop, I did not kill him." And he says, "That's not the point, really." And that's kind of the goal the movie sets for itself. We hear that quote 30 minutes into the film, and I think by the end, it truly fulfilled on that. It is kind of a tall mountain to climb, because, making a courtroom drama and not giving us a clear answer could come off as kind of pretentious, I guess.
It's definitely an insult to the audience a little bit.
It feels like an insult to the audience. However, by the end of the film, I was just sitting there and I was totally satisfied. I was like, yeah, this was a great journey. And I absolutely agree at this point. It doesn't really matter if she did it or not, because all of the other things explored here were so much more of the focus and so much more of the things really present in my mind that but it doesn't really change a thing. So I was totally stunned by the fact that I wasn't annoyed about the vagueness of the ending at all. I was totally satisfied.
That's totally fair. I wasn't really annoyed by the ending. I think, if anything, the things that annoyed me in this movie are the people. I hate everyone in this movie so much. Man, I hate everybody.
I want to start a little bit, actually, just a little bit about that with the actual trial,
Mhm.
right? Which, as you said, isn't even really a lot about the trial part as much as it is the emotions and the pushing of the drama. But on the subject of the trial, you mentioned that you're not that familiar with Austrian law. You're more familiar with like how American law works in
Yeah.
movies and TV, right? This is so backwards in a lot of ways than like how American trials would go. There are so many things happening in this that, not me being like, oh, American trials are how we should run things, but just my experience and looking at this and being like, that's not how this works. What's happening? I don't understand. I guess the two biggest things is that the I wish I had written his name down. The prosecutor,
Mhm.
the guy, trying to say she's guilty, is constantly using leading questions.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you know what that means, like in a court situation.
A question that already implies an answer, right?
Exactly, exactly. And he almost speaks in them.
Mhm.
Like it's just constantly like accusatory to her. And also like his general attitude to her, like he makes snide little remarks and stuff at her and shit. That's here would be called judicial misconduct.
Mhm.
Like that's not okay. You can't. That's unprofessional to do. And in this movie, it's just so like flagrantly whatever, which I get is a different court system than the one I'm used to, right?
Mhm.
But it drove me up the wall, and not because it's wrong, but just because I was just flabbergasted that that's how this is going to go down. It made him to be out a jerk. Um, Obviously, she's a jerk for a lot of reasons. The dad is obviously a jerk for a lot of reasons. The kid is a jerk. I'm sorry. You did what to a dog? No.
Yeah,
Dude,
that's a tough one.
no.
That's a tough one.
Dude, no. And he's not like in trouble for that at all or anything. Or like your experiment was interesting in court. Like what? No, you fucking drugged a
I would
dog. That's not
assume that
okay.
I would assume that he would still get problems afterwards, but for the moment and time being, that was not the important information, you know.
Which I do want to say this movie isn't bad. Like I said, I liked it,
Mhm.
but I don't really like that it won the Palm Dog Award
Is that an
for the
actual
dog
thing?
acting. It's an actual thing at the Palm d'Or. Yeah, it's an actual award that's given to a dog for its excellency in acting.
And you don't think it deserved it?
No, because the dog was drugged. That's not the dog acting. That's people drugging a dog and filming it. That's weird, man.
Was it actually drugged on set?
There's no way it wasn't. Its eyes were rolling into the back of its head. You can't teach a dog to roll
Yeah,
its
but
eyes into the back of its head.
that's here's the thing, because I wrote that down as well, and I was kind of astonished that they trained it, because to me it felt like it acted it out, just due to the fact that he snapped out of it, kind of, you know. Basically on command, he awoke himself and he started puking and stuff like that. It didn't feel like that could be faked in a way where he was actually drugged and all of a sudden they
It's not one solid shot. I mean, you give the dog a mild sedative, let it film it for the next 10 minutes, and then, I mean, it wakes up after another 5 or 10 minutes, and that's when you start filming again, right? Like,
Mhm.
but like dog
Yeah, but
anesthesiology is like in a complete thing. Like the veterinarian on set, they could time that super well.
mm,
I don't know.
yeah,
I'd have to
maybe.
look into it. I'd have to look into it because
Mhm.
that's how I took it. If the dog acted out those scenes and was trained to lull its eyes back into its head and leave its tongue out and like be floppy and stuff, that's insane. Yeah, give
Yeah,
the damn
that's how
dog an
I
award.
took it.
Give it
Yeah.
give it 9 awards. That's
Yeah.
cool. But but I've had too many dogs. I've seen too many dogs be trained. I have a hard time believing that dog was trained to do that.
I hope and I grasp at the straw that it was trained. But yeah, if not, then that's kind of fucked up. I took it as it being trained, and yes, you can fake stuff with like the cutting, but I
Mhm.
tried to pay attention this time, particularly for that scene, and it looks like he is still laying there with his tongue out and maybe not quite as eyes rolled back, but in the very shot where he does the puking and gets up, there is definitely a few seconds of continuous shooting where he was still laying there looking dead, and all of a sudden he isn't anymore. There is definitely some animal acting to it that was incredible.
I mean, you're not wrong, because there's a moment where I was literally watching. I was like, they drugged this damn dog. And I was like, this dog is going to die or something like that. And then he starts to wake up. And I remember being like, damn, he's waking up. He's waking up. So I definitely like recognized the action of him coming to in one solid shot.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
I also have something written down for this, because I had a completely different initial reaction to this. I also thought there's no fucking way that this dog is like acting this out right now. But my initial reaction was, oh wow, they made a fantastic dog puppet. Like when I first saw the dog laying there with the tongue out, my initial reaction was, yeah, no dog could ever act it out. They must have made a puppet for that, obviously.
Just a great dog puppet.
And all of a sudden the puppet starts moving and is alive again, and I'm like, what the fuck?
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, amazing.
I want to know the dog's name real quick. I want to look up the dog's name, because it won an award, right? Its name should be right here. Let's see. Anatomy of Fall. Messi as Snoop.
Messi, good actor.
That's not even that. There have been 6 dogs to win the Palm Dog this year.
Oh.
There's a Lifetime Achievement Award for dogs. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's amazing.
That just blew me. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I wanted to add a bit to something you said about the difference of American courtroom system and here the French one. A lot of American audiences had some weird reaction to this and were like kind of stunned by the way this all goes down. I obviously don't know how accurate it is, that this depiction of the French courtroom system. Maybe they took some creative liberties. But what I really loved about it was that in a way it is, particularly when it comes to the recording, it is kind of a interpretive discussion of the recording and of the evidence, and how different people look at the very same thing presented and they have different ideas of what it means. It's just this perfect summarization of the whole concept of, is a courtroom really the right place to find truth, which is a big theme of this movie, I feel like.
It's interesting that 12 Angry Men is the jurors, discussing things on how they feel about the evidence, how they feel about it and stuff. And, the courtroom itself is supposed to be a place of facts and objective truth and stuff.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. This often feels like they're just going off of feelings.
Yeah, there's moments where they are like, yeah, what did they mean by that? What is the intention behind the action he took, the words he said, even the fact that he recorded the fight to begin with. Was there an intention to start the fight to get this recording, And in an interesting way, I think it kind of mirrors what we are doing right now, where, we have watched the very same movie. We didn't experience different acting performances. We didn't experience a different story. We got the very same visuals, but we looked at it very differently. The things in our background, in our upbringing, in whatever it is, made the experience very different. And that does not mean that my experience of thinking this is pretty much a masterpiece is any worse or better than your experience of thinking, yeah, it's a pretty good movie, There's really not such a thing as objective truth, particularly when it comes to art, but I love how this movie kind of mirrors that within the justice system.
Sadly, though, you want you want to find the objective truth in the injustice, though,
Yeah, obviously it's the goal. Obviously it's the goal, and I mean I'm also trying to find, I guess, my truth at least of what movies mean. It doesn't mean that one can't strive for it. Just that
that's true.
One has to be aware of the limitations, I guess.
That's true. I just want to touch one more time on you talking about the amount of impact that feeling about something had in this movie in their court and stuff. it blew me away when one of them said, what about the murder weapon? And the guy literally just blasé was like, they never find those. We didn't even bother. And just skip over the murder weapon. Like, it's not actually required in America to have the murder weapon, but you're most of the time not gonna get a conviction without it. Like, you kind of need it most of the time.
Yeah.
So it just blew me away that they put more emphasis on the fight they had the night before than where's the thing that would have hit him.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It just that I thought that was crazy. I thought that was crazy.
Again, that might be a creative liberty thing, because it kind of mirrors the theme of the relationship being in the focus and not the courtroom case, One thing I absolutely adore about this film is the way the father gets portrayed throughout the film. Like, I already pointed at the fact that our first introduction is just a song choice of his and the volume choice of his. We don't see him, we don't hear him. The first time we see him, we see his dead body laying on the ground. We still can't hear him, and we still haven't seen him alive. The next time he comes up is when Sandra watches an old recording of him, but on mute. So this time we see him alive, but we can't hear him yet. The next time it comes up is when we get the audio recording, where first we only hear it, and then we kind of imagine him alive and with the audio for the very first time, before that gets taken away. And the next time is only from the memory of the boy with, that amazing, incredible scene. I love it so much, where you can see the dad talk, but the words coming out of his mouth are with the voice of the son, and, his interpretation really of the memory that dialogue imprinted on him. So this is incredible with how it really only introduces and gives us the picture of the father character in particular through the trial itself.
The only real insight into the father that you get, sadly, like as a person is that fight.
Which is super tainted. He was probably starting that fight on purpose with the goal in mind to gather material for his writing.
I'd never actually, that's pretty good. I never interpreted it like that he is purposely doing this for the sort, like having a writing source.
Yeah,
that's really good.
He records his family to have source and material for his writing. So the fact that he started the recording literally at the beginning of the fight, one can assume that he only started the recording with like already things in the back of his mind to throw against his wife to make her angry, So
I really hated him in the fight. I wanted to be super supportive of him in this fight. You want to, like, the guy's dead. You want to, like, kind of root for the guy a little bit, or hope, he's, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But both of them suck.
Yeah.
That entire fight, they're just both terrible people. And it's actually like a really great representation of a long-term relationship argument. It, is very extreme, and no healthy couple should be having that kind of fight. But the fact that both of them are obviously care about each other, and both of them can be venomous at each other at the same time is really, really, really real. Might be why I didn't like the movie as much as you. You know me for a long time enough to know that I prefer things not set in reality as much as I can. I think that with these kind of movies, courtroom dramas, there's a couple layers to what make me like these kind of movies. It's the courtroom aspect, because that's what I'm here for. Obviously the characters and stuff, right? But what the trial is about can be a really big make it or break it for me. And because this movie is so much about this couple and about a relationship and stuff, that's just so not my bag, not my jam, that I think was the thing that really didn't make me think this movie was amazing. It was just the context of the trial. I just didn't, that's not the stuff I want out of a courtroom, which isn't a flaw of the movie itself in any way. It isn't. That's just a personal, taste thing.
Yeah, and it plays again in the thing that I said about, the different expectations going into a movie.
Mhm.
I already mentioned the very first line, what do you want to know? But one of the very last lines, and particularly the last lines regarding the court case, the dialogue between her and her attorney at the restaurant, Sandra says, when you win, you expect some reward, but there isn't any. It's just over. And he replies, maybe sometimes we expect too much. And I kind of love that this is already a comment on the very takeaway you kind of have of this movie,
The very nature of its own ending.
Exactly. There are gonna be people who won't be satisfied with the film ending the way it ended. And yeah, maybe that's just something, a matter of expectation, and you can't really fulfill all the expectations that well.
That's perfectly fair. Yeah.
Again, a great way the movie comments kind of on itself, which happens throughout the film. I want to get into the concept of perspectives, because that's a big one for me with this film. We already, mentioned it several times with upbringing, etc. But the movie really plays with this also on a visual side. There's so many different perspectives the camera takes on. In the very beginning, there's stuff like a long take on the eye height of the dog going through the house once the police all arrives. Kind of dog perspective, if you want to call it that. There's a camera recording of the boy giving his first testimony, like shown through a VCR recording or whatever. There's reenactment of the scene, and even when Sandra Hüller tries to not play along anymore, the police people themselves act out the fight. There is TV news cameras of the lawyers getting interviewed. There's the preparation Sandra and her lawyer do in the attic, where, how are you going to phrase your opening statements, etc. There's perspectives like when she talks about her son's accident, the camera is super close up in her face. It's like you almost only see her lips moving. There's a shot like that. And to me, that's kind of recreating the view of the world the son has, because he's always
got to zoom in. He's always got to look really close to stuff. Yeah,
exactly. And she is talking about the accident that made that happen, and it is portrayed in a way that the son could only look at her whilst she's explaining it, which is an interesting play on perspective again. The different interpretations of the blood splattering that is for once shown by the prosecution with the CGI recreation of the balcony and the dummy falling down. And on the other hand, you have that model work that the defending side expert shows and how they explain it, which is an interesting way to kind of show two different train of thoughts in filmmaking, I feel like. One is the practical approach and one is the CGI approach, which again are two different perspectives on film. Before the final testimonies, let's put it that way. We see the talk show program of the trial, and even just within that, we kind of have three different perspectives of, you have the hosts who do this for entertainment. They are here to entertain the audience watching it. We have the perspective of the boy when we cut out of the footage, watching that, predominantly listening to it, I guess, and how it affects him with his very different experience of he is the one who is about to maybe change the outcome of this very trial they are discussing. And then you also cut to Sandra watching the very same program and her being affected again by a very different perspective on the whole story. And yeah, the big ones are obviously the two times we see the husband in the court case. The one time the audio recording and how we cut out of it once the violence begins, really just showing us that we have to imagine it ourselves. Who hit who at what times? What was the exact extent? We can only assume, really. And the second one and final big one is the final testimony by the boy, where it's literally his memory is all that we can trust upon with the words being said by the father character. And I love how that visual just represents that flawlessly. Yeah, this movie plays so much with this idea of perspective, and that's just something I love about film, when a movie just takes every aspect imaginable relating to a theme and just plays around with it in all the ways possible.
Yeah, it really does. I didn't think about a lot of those kind of contrasts. Some of them, present really well. Some, I guess I wasn't probably looking for as much because I'm so more invested in the technical aspects of the trial and stuff. And so they kind of like drop it a little bit. But so the fight happens, hits are blown or whatever, and she says that he like hit himself and all this kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except he didn't have any bruising like the next day, right? That's the next day, right? That's
Do
the
we
fight
know that?
from the day. Well, because in the very beginning, the autopsy goes over
Oh,
about
yeah.
all the things about him, right? And they don't mention any bruising on his face, and there's no bruising on his face. But she does. She has a bruise on her arm that she apparently gets from hitting her arm on that counter all the time, right? But it just makes sense to me that's where that bruise comes from. I feel like it's trying to point that he was actually the abusive one, physically.
I'm not sure. I think at that point she, in the trial, confesses to the fight, obviously. And she says that her bruise was him grabbing her arm, I think. I think that gets addressed.
Okay.
And I think she is the one confessing to the fact that she hit him.
That's fair. I thought she said that he hit himself.
I'm not entirely sure. I think, like, in my memory, it was her hitting him. Because it stood out to me as kind of a way to subvert gender expectations, I guess. But yeah, I would need to pay attention to the autopsy part, because yeah, that's an interesting detail that you can't really see bruises on him. Interesting.
It's interesting to me, looking at this more, right, that you say that this film focuses so much more on the emotional reactions of these facts rather than the objective truth of these facts that are being presented in the trial, right?
Yeah.
While at the same time, I keep seeing or finding these catch-ups, in some of these facts.
Inconsistencies. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hyper focused on. I'm not thinking about these feelings things, but you're thinking about these feeling things, right? So it's kind of interesting that like we're having almost separate ideas of the ending, how that should have played out, I feel almost like the movie presents the facts that if you look at them on paper, say, she did it, she did this thing. But through the emotional narrative, you end with, I don't think she did it. Or not you personally, but that's what the movie attempts to have you end with is that she didn't do it. Even though the actual evidence shows otherwise. Which is honestly really interesting how that compares to the ending of 12 Angry Men.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to get into a few notes that I took on a rewatch in particular.
Okay.
Because there's things that I noticed or might have changed in my experience on the second time around. Going back to the beginning, the interview scene with PIMP playing in the background. In the trial, there's this moment where they bring up the possibility that it was flirting, what she did there, the way she kind of asked counter questions and stuff like that. Did you experience it that way on the first watch? Did you feel any flirtiness to that scene?
100%.
100%. Okay, interesting.
100%. I felt like she was, because I went into this movie completely blind. I didn't know anything about what it was about. But when she mentioned the husband was upstairs, I was like, oh, this isn't a, okay. I thought this lady was interested in this other lady, and that's what was going on here.
Okay, interesting. Because on my first watch, I didn't pick up on any of the flirting. And on the second watch, I kind of could feel the flirting side. And what I was asking myself is that because I already have that idea imprinted in my mind due to the fact that the prosecution brings it up later on and that I already know about that? Because that is something the movie itself addresses at some point, where they kind of say that the final testimony of the boy can't be trusted because his memory is obviously tainted by the experience of going through that courtroom case already. You know, he just found out about all these things regarding his father, and that might taint his memory looking back on that. And to me, the rewatching the opening just kind of felt exactly like that, where I'm not sure how much of it is just the imprinting of the trial, really, just like the prosecution said, but the other way around, where I'm more convinced it was flirting now than I was before. But who knows?
I think it's really shown in all of her relationships with the various people, you know, the way she behaves with her attorney, lawyer person, which again, in America would be a huge conflict of interest, and you would not have a lawyer that you are sleeping with or slept with before. No, you know, that doesn't.
I had the feeling that they had feelings for each other before, but it didn't ever get any further than that. That's how I took it, but maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, you could totally be right, but either way, she clearly has, especially after she has a drink, clearly flirts with him, or even like you know, and I think she acts very similar to the woman in the interview in the beginning. I feel like there's a lot of, she treats him and her very similarly. You don't even see that with the husband at all. Whenever, you know, the very few times they ever interact, she has such an interesting and toxic view of sexuality. I didn't know how to word this earlier. That song PIMP, they mentioned, you know, it was a very misogynistic song and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And you know, she's German, it's German, etc. Blah blah blah. But the more I've been trying to think about how to word this thought out, is, you know, she is clearly somehow abusive. She is an adulterer. She sleeps around behind his back. She mentions at one point that he shouldn't care that she's sleeping around because it's just sex. I love you. It wasn't emotional with them. It was purely sexual or whatever, right? These are classic, like, dudes who sleep with tons of chicks and cheat on their girlfriends lines, right?
Yeah.
These are those misogynistic type lines. It's interesting how much she almost embodies what's wrong with that song. It's a very interesting role reversal to have her be playing this, you know, she's not a misogynist, of course, but, you know, like a womanizer almost, or a, you know,
yeah,
but yeah.
I absolutely get what you mean, and it again plays into the thing that I pointed out earlier with if she was the violent one, that adds to, you know, it would be the cliche that he is the misogynistic husband, you know, hitting his wife, but be it the violence or the infidelity, it both plays into that reversing the gender roles.
Yeah, I do really like that about this movie. And, you know, I might even take back a little bit about it being a little bit of like a made for TV thing. I might take that back a little bit.
Great.
So it definitely still isn't like in my top 3 or anything like that. But I think what that really comes down to is just the context of the trial and you know, what that character drama is about. You know, is about relationships, and that's not really a theme I really care for in movies. I think the other thing that makes this movie lesser to me, especially when we compare it to 12 Angry Men, is that this movie is mean. This is kind of a mean-spirited film. There's a lot of angry and a lot of mean and a lot of, you know, and 12 Angry Men has that too a little bit, you know, obviously with some of those characters. But the core of 12 Angry Men is optimism and trying to give the benefit of the doubt and a positive end feeling. And this movie does not do that. And I think that's the thing I didn't like about it, you know?
Which is interesting that you pointed out, because in Sidney Lumet's filmography, you can kind of see a trend where his first film is probably the most optimistic. Throughout his filmography, with him getting older, you can definitely see more and more pessimism about humanity creeping into his movies. And he kind of started off with this optimistic hope for humanity, and ended up hating humanity more and more throughout his life, apparently.
Old man gets cranky and hates everything. How crazy. That's really funny.
A few more like short little notes on that
Yeah.
stuff that struck out to me on a rewatch. I love the intro credits where it's the only context we have for the relationship when the trial starts, really, because we see those images of Sandra and her husband at the height of the relationship, like all of the happy photos, happy memories. And during that credit sequence, we hear a piano playing very badly. And at that point, we have no context for that. But obviously, on a rewatch, you realize, oh, we can actually hear the boy practice this piece on the piano for the first time, or one of the first times.
Mhm.
And I love how that very piece of music gets used as almost a progression of time, because it returns again and again. And every time the boy is playing more accurately the piece. And that's a beautiful detail to use that as a storytelling device. In the boy's first testimony, I realized an interesting detail, because the important detail is that he messes up which tape he was standing next to, you know? There's all those tapes throughout the building, and he was like convinced it's the gaffer tape or whatever outside at the shed. And later on, he believes it was the tape inside, just at the exit. And in that very first testimony, the boy actually stops and thinks for like 2 seconds before claiming it was the tape on the outside for sure. The detail of his insecurity about that, despite wording it very secure, is already planted there, which I think is an interesting detail.
See, that's one of those moments where I felt like him is changing, to the inside was him, like, trying to save his mom.
Yeah, you could look at it that way, but I love the detail that it took him a few seconds to come to the conclusion on the initial testimony. Yeah, it was for sure that one. Yeah. There's a fun thing about language barriers in a way. And Sandra Hüller being a native German speaker,
Mhm.
and the middling turf, as she puts it, is that they talk to each other in the household in English.
Mhm.
And with you being native English, I thought it would be fun that we just switch the podcast and find middling ground and do the podcast in French from now on. What do you think, Devyn?
Oh man, non.
Fair enough. My French wouldn't suffice for that either.
No, I love language. You know that about me. I'm pretty
Yeah.
fond of language. I have a real struggle with French, man. We would have a better time if on our off time you taught me German and we did it in German. That's super funny though. I practiced the name of this movie, like, Anatomie d'un Chute. I practiced that like 5 times.
I wrote down one scene that sparked my interest. When Sandra leaves her own house, like for the last weekend before the final testimony of the boy, where he wants to be in solitude and be left alone and not be influenced by her, she quotes someone and says, someone said, money doesn't make you happy, but it's still better to cry in the car than on the subway. And she says she doesn't remember who said that. So I did some Googling, and it's a quote by François Sargon, definitely butchered that name as well, who was a female writer of both novels and screenplays in her own regards. So kind of this person mirrors both the character of Sandra, but also Justine Triet. And not only that meta mirroring exists, but also the quote is wrong. The accurate quote would be, money may not buy you happiness, but I'd rather cry in a Jaguar than on a bus. So not only is it mirroring the reality of it all, but it is also a comment and a statement again on this idea of memory isn't accurate, neither in that we remember all the details, like who said that quote, nor in is it accurate in what exactly was the thing being said with the quote slightly being misquoted. And that's just such a small little joke on a side, basically, of her trying to get over the fact that it's a difficult situation she's going through right now, and kind of wants to joke about it a bit to lighten the mood. But it adds so much more to the movie, which, yeah, I love it.
But you could also even maybe just a little bit look at it as, she adapted ideas from her husband into her own stories. And maybe it even kind of shows a little bit how, she takes an idea and she kind of makes it her own idea.
Oh, yeah, interesting. I love that.
Like, not as something she's intentionally doing, obviously,
Yeah.
just something she kind of does already as a person.
Yeah, the way her mind works.
And she's already talked about, many times talked about how she combine people's, real stories and make them fiction and create fiction out of their stories. She likes to combine it or whatever. That's how the lady opens the movie in that interview. Is like, you need to know me before you can write fiction about me, basically.
A few more things. One about the boy's final testimony. He meant himself. Now I know that he meant himself. It's really interesting to me to also look at this film as a slightly coming-of-age story, because the biggest character arc or the biggest development any of these characters had to go through is definitely the boy, who started off as a very innocent mindset of basically still being at that age where your parents are perfect. They are the heroes. They can't ever do anything wrong. And part of becoming adult is the realization that they really aren't. They have their flaws. They are humans themselves. And yeah, the boy really has to go through that experience in a speed run, basically, with finding out all of the problems of the father, finding out all of the problems within that relationship, of the violence, of the infidelity, of you name it.
Dang, I think I would have been more. I didn't really pick up on that, but I don't think I was really in tune with the kid's emotions because I was so mad at him for drugging a dog.
Yeah.
Go on though.
Yeah, you could make the case that throughout this case, he really grows up. I mean, by the end, he grew strong enough to comprehend and work through the very adult topic of suicide. And if you believe that she did it, that she was really the one killing her husband, you could even make the argument that he made the deliberate decision to skew with his memory in order to kind of rescue his mother, to not lose her as well, which, yeah, that takes some guts,
That's interesting. Yeah, I never thought about it as that angle. I guess I interpreted it less, about him growing up or like that, and more less in an aging way and more in like a defeated reality kind of way.
Yeah. Which is a part of growing up, to be fair.
It is. It really is. Yeah, I guess I just didn't make the connection of it being growing up, know. But yeah, that's a really, really, really good way to look at that too, man.
No, I just have a very short final thing, because I also watched some interviews for this. I watched the Q&A panel they did at the New York Film Festival. Writer-director Justine Triet and her partner, which is the co-writer, and Sandra Hüller, the actress. First of all, the partner thing actually caused a lot of laughter within the audience once they realized that they wrote it together. Justine said it is totally fine, he's still alive. And they both agreed that they enjoyed the process. This was a COVID project, so like 2 weeks before the lockdown, they kind of got the idea for this court case. And then they decided, yeah, since we're stuck at home together all the time right now anyways, let's just write this screenplay together. They agreed that they both enjoyed the process, but they will never write again together. So that's an interesting side to that story.
I wonder if that fight was a little too based on reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I mentioned, it was a little real, that fight.
Yeah, it might be a bit hard to go through writing even such a fight as a couple.
Mm-hmm. Are they different nationalities?
No, I think they're both French.
Okay, I would say that I would add an interesting layer to that fight if they were both different nationalities with that language talk.
One more little detail is that they wrote it with Sandra Hüller in mind, which is also why the character in the film is also called Sandra. They wanted to, once they present her the script, they wanted her to already feel like it's her. So, that's an interesting detail, that it was planned like this from the beginning. And my favorite part, however, about the whole Q&A was a very meta thing that some people in the comments even questioned if it was deliberate, because it's so fitting. They had a French-English translator with them on stage, because Justine Triet's knowledge in English was slightly too limited, and for some questions, she had to turn to her translator and ask for the English word, like Sandra in the movie has to turn to her lawyer and ask for the French word at points. And at a certain point, she said the answer is too complex, she will switch to French, and gave the whole answer in French for the translator to translate and explain afterwards, which is just such an incredible reality mirroring art thing that, I loved it. And people also picked up on it in the comments on YouTube and even questioned if that was all just a meta thing planned from the beginning, that she would mirror the movie in that way.
That's pretty great. That's got to be kind of common, though, right? Like a little bit.
Yeah, it's just so great to see it in relation to a movie that has the very same problem happen.
Art imitates life, and life imitates art.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they say. Your first prescription for our next appointment will be the 2023 David Fincher adaptation of the French comic book series of the same name, The Killer, which follows the nameless hitman. Michael Fassbender makes his return to acting by playing the titular character in this gritty yet grounded take on an assassin's life.
To top off your prescription, we are gonna pair Fincher's The Killer with Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. It is one of the most famous works in Hitchcock's filmography, and one of the most visually quoted films probably ever. Starring James Stewart, the mystery thriller explores the themes of privacy and personal space in a timeless classic. If you don't want to get spoiled for either of these films, check them out before our next appointment 2 weeks from now. I'm George.
I'm Devyn.
And this was your Medicinema.